Hi guys, so we're in our last unit, so hopefully this will be pretty much what your final will be on. I did forego having a third exam for you guys, so you only have the 2 exams in your final. I think that'll work a little bit better for this semester, given the fact that we have so much, uncertainty with everything that's gone on. So we're going to talk a little bit about some infectious diseases. Specifically, we'll talk about different bacterial diseases and viral diseases in 2 different PowerPoints. And then in addition, I'll probably give you some additional information as well. But for this, we're just going to talk about pretty much like where the infectious disease and kind of how that plays into your anatomy. Again, this is not an anatomy and physiology class, and therefore I'm going to kind of briefly go over this. This is not going to be something super in-depth. You may see like 1 or 2 questions on your final on this. Okay, so we're just going to talk about the infectious diseases of our skin, of our ears, eyes, respiratory system, any of the oral region, which I probably will throw a question on there because you guys should know that being dental hygienists. Your basically your circulatory system, central nervous system, your gastrointestinal or your gastrointestinal tract, and then some types of opportunistic infections that you might see. So the idea here is that like we kind of have more like 2 different categories of diseases. There's microbial intoxications, and then what we're more concerned with, which is going to be what we'll talk about, is infectious diseases. And basically what there is that they're basically a disease that's caused by a pathogen, which is one of our microbes that we're going to talk about, that's somewhere within our body, kind of colonizes within our body. Some pathogens can affect more than one site. So like, one time, and a lot of times they can also move from one site to another, which is how they become more infectious, and how you get more sick. So that's essentially how that works. So when we're looking at the skin, most of that's just going to be your epidermis and dermis that we'll be concerned with. And then what you treat that with is going to be your triple antibiotic ointment. If you need to use additional antibiotics, it means that you have usually you have like a little red area with a white center. Usually means that that's what you're going to see when it comes to that type of an infection. So you can see your epidermis and your dermis are the first 2 layers. Your subcutaneous layer, if you're within this layer, a lot of times that infection may be involved in your circulatory system, which is not a good thing. I apologize. So most of what you're going to be concerned with is going to be within your epidermis and your dermis layer. So some examples here. These are just some surface lesions that you can see that are indications of some type of an infection of your skin. Okay. Now, when it comes to your ears, usually it's mostly going to come in through your external ear canal, but it can also come in through your nose or throat, or it can come through your blood and lymph nodes. There's just 2 different definitions here of the middle ear and the outer ear. Again, most of the time they're usually kind of the same thing. You usually have just a plain old ear infection. And usually what happens is that within your inner ear or middle ear, you're going to see some type of an infection occur, and you'll kind of like, get almost like a headache. A lot of times people use that as an example. Okay, when it comes to eye infections, most of these 2 here, conjunctivitis, cheroconjunctivitis, keratitis, most of those are considered pink eye, is the most common of those. And the idea here is that those are just basically the terms for different types of pink eye. That's usually considered an infection of the eye. You're going to see your blood vessels will kind of be more pronounced, and that's an indication that you do have an infection in your eye. And it is highly contagious. Remember, if you have a lot of what I call sleepies, but a lot of discharge within your eye, that's a good indication of the fact that you may have pink eye. When it comes to respiratory system, there's 2 different ways you can have an infection. Upper respiratory tract is going to be everything from your trachea up. Okay, so that includes your larynx, orthopharynx, parasinuses, nasal pharynx, your nose, your orthopharynx, which is right around your throat area. Again, those are going to be considered your upper respiratory tract. So if you have a sinus infection, typically that's an upper respiratory tract infection. When you're looking at a lower respiratory tract infection, This will be something that has to do with your bronchial tubes, alveoli of the lung, your lungs, your trachea. So, like I said, when it comes to your upper respiratory infections, usually they're just caused by opportunistic pathogens within your microbiome that protects your respiratory tract. Usually, what happens is you get some other type of illness, of some sort. If you get the flu, usually what comes after the common cold, usually what comes after that a lot of times is going to be a sinus infection. And that's kind of the idea, is that because they've been activated, they're now an opportunistic pathogen. Whereas lower respiratory infections, respiratory tract infections, those are really bad. You ever get those? This is typically pneumonia or bronchitis. Those are going to be what you consider more of the infectious diseases. They're more common for your death, common cause of death. So that's just an example. So this is the ones that, kind of you would be familiar with if you have bronchitis, pneumonia. Those are both going to be bronchopneumonia, essentially bronchitis and pneumonia. Those are going to be found in your lower respiratory tract, whereas laryngitis and pharyngitis and sinusitis, those are going to be found in your upper respiratory tract. When it comes to the oral cavity, you guys know about all of this type of stuff. You know all about this. So I'm just going to kind of briefly just state that this is something that you should know. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But just make sure you also know about gingivitis and periodontitis, periodontal disease, dental caries, cavities as well, trench mouth, all the different types of diseases that, could be caused by improper healthcare within your oral cavity. Okay, so gastrointestinal tract. So the big one that you kind of are probably familiar with and that everybody's like, I don't want to deal with this, would be diarrhea, right? Can cause by a lot of different things. You can eat improper foods and your body's not able to digest them. It could be caused by viruses or bacteria. Possibly if you're taking an antibiotic of some sort, it can cause diarrhea. That's why you have to take a lot of times with an antibiotic, a probiotic, in order to ensure that you have proper movement throughout your gastrointestinal tract. Okay? So that's just the idea here. And the idea is that this is because we have microbes within our gastrointestinal tract, but most of those are destroyed in the stomach or the duodenum if they come before that. You do have some that are along your intestines as well. So these all can become opportunistic pathogens. One of them that we've already talked about is the Helicobacter pylori. And those, remember, they cause stomach ulcers. Okay? So any of these other related terms, big ones kind of are gastritis. That's going to give you gastric pain. Hepatitis, again, all of those are infections of the gastrointestinal tract. When it comes to the final end, this is the genitourinary tract. This mostly does with urinary tract infections, and you can have two different types. You can either have infections of the kidneys and the uteries, which is the upper portion of your urinary tract, or you could have it in your lower portion of your urinary tract, which would be the bladder, urethra, and possibly prostate. Now, this most of the time, whenever you're talking about the urinary tract infections, a lot of times you're going to be dealing with essentially yeast. Sometimes you can deal with yeast infections along those lines, but most of those are going to be classified into these different categories. The most common kind is just going to be E. coli, though. So that's going to be really the most common kind for this portion of pyelonephritis. That's going to be the most common kind. The second most common kind is going to be caused by chlamydia trachomatis. Okay? Now, we can also have infections of the genital tract. So this is a lot of times just pretty much called yeast infections, or pelvic inflammatory disease is another example, endometriosis, so endometrius. Those are all can be caused by infections within the genital tract. You can also have a sexually transmitted disease. Those are going to be ones that only can be transmitted from contact to contact through sexual transmission, obviously. Okay. So there's just the two different anatomies. Most of the time you're going to see a lot of times, especially with yeast infections, there'll be infections of the vagina area. So just in case you wanted to know. Now, when it comes to the circulatory system, this is not the best thing to have, but a lot of times this is going to be involved in both the circulatory, which is the cardiovascular system, and your lymphatic system. So lymphoma would be considered part of this, or lymphadenous, lymphadenectomy. All of those are considered part of your lymphatic system. You can also have myocarditis, pericarditis, or endocarditis. These are going to be factions. Those are going to be involved in your cardiovascular system, and so it's a little bit different. Okay. And mostly these are involved in the heart area. Blood's typically sterile, and usually blood, because it carries your white blood cells within it, a lot of times can protect you and indicate whether or not you have infection, but you're not going to get usually a blood infection. If you get a blood infection, it's not going to be very good for you. And usually if you see, a lot of times you'll see infections of the lymphatic system before you'll see a blood infection. Okay. Now the big one here. So when it comes to the central nervous system, the most common type, and this is really bad if you get it, but because there's no microbiota, there's no normal flora that protects your central nervous system, it can really be affected by whatever microbe that would be able to get into it. And the biggest one, the most common one that you may have heard of this would be meningitis, okay? Specifically bacterial meningitis. And essentially what it is that the meninges, they're a part of the layer within your brain, okay? So you have your white matter, your gray matter, which are all brain tissue, and then shortly outside of that is what we call your meninges. And you essentially get an infection of the brain is what meningitis is, which is very dangerous. Usually the inflammation of the meninges, usually this can be caused by many different things. There's not really a whole lot of idea, but a lot of times too, people will mistake it for influenza or the flu instead of actually getting treatment for it. So this is the example. These are the three major types that cause bacterial meningitis, which is very, very common and very common, unfortunately, not super common, but when you do get it, a lot of times the death rate is very high. And I know this because I've had personal experience with, not personally, but I've had a friend that passed away from it. Okay. So when we talked about opportunistic infections, again, these are ones that are always going to be found within your body. But whenever they are under certain conditions, they cause disease. And so we've talked many times about them. We'll talk more about them later. So you guys should be aware, just, we do have opportunistic infections. And then emerging infections, these are ones that you can actually get into your body. So swine flu, bird flu, all of your H1, all of your flus, your HIVs, Lyme disease, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So that's just a brief overview of human infections. We're going to go ahead and, really break it down into the different types of infections in the next couple of PowerPoints. Maybe. Possibly. Really? This is like